This presentation covers Georgian architecture in London, England through the period of 1714 through 1830. The Georgian period begins with the building room, which followed the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 and continues to the end of the boom signaled by Waterloo in 1815. Or you can say it began with the rise of the Palladian movement and ends with the whole classical tradition. The growth of architectural styles in London was closely controlled by the wealth and political stability of the country. When there was a boom and money was invested in house building, many architects and builders had the opportunity to express and develop the current architectural ideas. When there was depression, ideas withered for want of opportunity. The city was raised by private, not public wealth. London is one of the few European capitals where church property and church interests have been an overriding factor. The city is a metropolis of merchandise. The basis of its building history is the trade cycle rather than the changing ambitions and policies of rulers and administrators. The Georgian city developed due to its people rather than a minister of the crown with intentions to create propaganda through architecture. The Georgian age of architecture in London began when George I inherited the throne in 1714 and ended when George IV died in 1830. Overlapping with this architectural age was the period of Baroque architecture, which was prominent from 1600 to 1750, and the period of Regency architecture, which began in 1811 and ended in 1820. The Georgian age was characterized by the immense social change that occurred as a result of the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, which lasted almost as long as the Georgian age did. The Industrial Revolution made class divisions larger and deepened conflicts between political parties, thus causing more civil unrest. It was also characterized by the seemingly never-ending string of wars that plagued the era, including the 7 Years' War that ended in 1763, the American Revolution, and the Napoleonic Wars that lasted from 1793 to 1850. These global discrepancies contributed to this social unrest and also caused a level of economic depression in England. The loss of their American colonies, as well as smaller scale economic issues, like when the South Sea Bubble, a government-sponsored stock investment scheme, crashed in 1720, together caused relative economic disparity in the country as a whole, meaning the government could not put as much money into media like architecture and the arts. That being said, the arts flourished during the Georgian age. This included, but was not limited to, architecture as areas like poetry and writing and music, as artists who are world-renowned to this day were gaining popularity. For example, Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. While at the start of the Georgian age, London spanned about 25 square miles of solid developed land, today the Greater London area encompasses over 600 square miles of land along the River Thames. The climate of modern-day London includes mild winters with temperatures averaging around 52 degrees Fahrenheit in January and around 65 degrees Fahrenheit in July. Due to the heat island created by the high concentration of buildings in the heart of the city, temperatures from the surrounding municipal areas have varied up to 16 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the temperature of the inner city. This is not the only effect of climate change that can be observed in this bustling city, as London has an infamous smog problem and faces serious threats of floods from the River Thames as its water level rises each year. The basic layout of the city is a concentric ring system that marks the natural growth of the city over time, with the River Thames separating northern London from southern London. London is an organic city and thus has no grand road layout. This means that public transportation, including on the river, is incredibly popular. Additionally, its organic nature lends it to function more as a compound or polycentric city than as a typical city. This means that there are many different districts and buildings with very little clear hierarchy between them. This is what gives London its diverse historical and evolving character. The earliest documents of the layout of London consist of the city being around 1 square mile in size. The City of London was also surrounded by walls. The City of London grew out from the center in a concentric ring system. There was a lot of immigration to London during this time. The rapid growing population led to the rapid expansion of London as a city. This led to expansion far beyond the medieval walls that once enclosed the city. The streets in London are organic, so they move freely in the city as well as follow the existing topographical areas. The organic nature is also partly due to how London expanded. The city expanded as people moved to it, so it grew outwards from the center, also called a concentric ring system. London is also separated into districts. These districts can represent different ages and style of architecture, as well as when people moved to that area. The districts are not clearly defined, which leads to the historical and fluid feel of the City of London. The Thames River separates London into northern and southern London. Before, there was only one passage from London to Westminster, so the city was more densely populated near the bridge between the two cities. This is likely due to the fact that people want to be close to the center of a city in order to keep up with everything that is going on. Over time, new bridges were created over the Thames River as the expansion of London continued. In the 1550s, London was only around 1 square mile. The City of London was around a mile away from Westminster, which was where many events and buildings were located, such as theaters, taverns, and government buildings. In the 1550s, London and Westminster became linked through a broad highway. This highway encouraged expansion. The only way to cross the Thames River was through the London Bridge. No other passages were built until 1750. As a result, London grew out from the center and was densely populated near the London Bridge. Due to the wealth and power that came as a result of the expansion, London continued to grow and it became a strong and stable city. Along with the expansion came the creation of the London docks and new towns alongside the river to accommodate the growing industries and trade. The style of Georgian architecture is a mix, imitating both classical Roman and Greek architecture. Georgian London was formed not by great architects, but by master builders, entrepreneurs, and all kinds of speculators. The Georgian architecture of this time was overly simple and understated. Walls were usually of adorned brick, and windows and doorways were framed in wood painted white. Facades were symmetrically arranged around the ground level entrance or, on occasion, accessed by a short flight of steps. Grander houses might have a portico, pilasters, or corner quoins. The Georgian style was England's first truly national style. It was unique to England and its colonies and arose out of the Protestant ethic of non-demonstrative simplicity. Functional and serviceable, it was adopted by the newly emerging mercantile class, which was heavily involved in coal and agricultural ventures, not only in England but also abroad. Georgian architecture transformed towns where earlier buildings were neatly screened by Georgian fronts, and it caused much rebuilding and refashioning throughout the country. London's expansion throughout this time gave wide opportunities for the development of the style. After the destruction of buildings during the Great Fire, Sir Christopher Wren was the first to envision a building up to date with European neoclassical sensibilities. He was impressed with Italianate examples in literature, particularly Palladian simplicity. The Northumberland House was passed through many people but was originally home to Lord Henry Howard. The house then passed to Thomas Howard, who was part of Lord Henry Howard's family. It then passed to Algernon Percy through marriage in 1642. Percy was the main reason for construction on the house, as he decided that he wanted the public side of the house to overlook the garden. The Northumberland House was originally designed in a Jacobean style. The Jacobean style of architecture was popular during the 16th and early 17th centuries. The Jacobean style was based off of Renaissance ideas. The transition of the Northumberland House into the Georgian age of architecture was led by the architect Daniel Garrett. Rococo, Palladianism, and Classicism were all styles that the renovation took inspiration from. Daniel Garrett was not on the project for the entirety of it, as he passed away in 1753. Other architects who worked on the project included James Payn, who finished the Gallery Ballroom, which was started by Daniel Garrett in 1757. The Northumberland House is located around a central square area. This space allowed for a more public area of gathering. The house was also separated so the public space was on one side and the private area was on the opposite side. When Algernon Percy took ownership of the house in 1642, he changed the public and private areas so the public side overlooked the garden. Daniel Garrett also designed the two wings shown in the plan, which were added after the original house was built. The addition of these wings changed the plan from being a nearly square rectangle to having two wings protrude from the side. The purpose of the east wing was to house servants. The purpose of the west wing was to be a waiting room, bedchamber, library, and dressing room. But the west wing was transformed into the Gallery Ballroom. The Gallery Ballroom is 2 stories, and the new mixture of styles was incorporated into this massive space. This is what the Northumberland House became known for. The Northumberland House was composed of Palladian architectural framework. The interior of the space also contained Rococo stucco. Stucco is a coarse plaster composed of Portland or masonry cement, sand, and hydrated lime mixed with water and applied in a plastic state to form a hard covering for exterior walls. In this case, the stucco was colored and then used similarly to paint. The ceilings and many rooms of the house were decorated with stucco or antique paintings. The rest of the room was also often adorned with items such as tapestries, chairs, marble tables, and large glasses. The chimney pieces were also unique as they were made of marble and they were carved. The combination of these elements made for an interesting display and was partly the reason for this house being so well known. When redesigning the Northumberland House, Daniel Garrett took inspiration from classical, Rococo, and Palladian styles. Daniel Garrett showed these influences through the interiors of the space. Rococo stucco work can be seen throughout the house on many of the walls and ceilings. This work is similar to that of Jean-Antoine Watteau. The work shown in the period of Watteau was also known for its contrast and changes. This is fitting for this house as it was placed next to many other different styles and it was becoming Georgian architecture. Palladian architectural framework as well as motifs can be seen on the windows, such as the image on the right. He also decorated the walls with Italian paintings. Additionally, the furniture that was placed in the room was of Rococo style. The courtyards were redesigned based off of classical and Palladian aspects. Bedford Square is located in Bloomsbury, London. This square is one of the few that still has all of the Georgian aspects still intact. The Bedford estate had started construction in 1775. The Bedford estate had a rectangular proportioned square with a central garden in the shape of an oval. To enter the square, you would go through the corners, as each of the sides was lined with a block of houses. The central houses, as shown in the image on the left, were rendered in stucco. They also had classical columns, as well as triangular pediments set into the wall. This square is unique because it was the only one of the West End squares to have a symmetrical palace-fronted block. In other words, the houses on the end of each block would slightly project to create an effect of an end pavilion. In the square, the geometry, spatial quality, and uniform architecture all interact with one another and project the harmonious application of Georgian development and town planning in the West End. Bloomsbury Square is one of the first garden squares. This square was placed around 1636 by the Earl of Southampton. This square was originally called Southampton Square. On the southeast side of the square was Southampton Place. Across from that was Lord Southampton's house. The other sides of the square were bordered with houses. One feature that allows Bloomsbury Square to stand out was the fact that all but one of the entrance streets was on an axis aligned to the developer's house on the opposite side of the square. According to Summerson, 3 clear principles of development were laid down. First, the principle of an aristocratic lead, the presence of the landowner's own house in his square. Second, the principle of a complete unit of development comprising square, secondary streets, market, and perhaps church. Third, the principle of the speculative builder operating as a middleman in building the houses. Manchester Square began construction in 1774 by the Duke of Manchester. He also began construction on his own house at this time. His house was located on the north side and took up most of it. His house was bordered by Manchester Street and Spanish Place, which were entrance roads into Manchester Square. The other entrance roads were centered on the other sides. The other sides of Manchester Square were lined with standard houses, and they overlooked the garden in the center of the square. Today, Manchester House is a Victorian museum building. Lord St. Albans designed St. James Square. When originally planning the square, he wanted the square to only contain 3 to 4 mansions on each side to be housed by the best families, his being included. But, before construction, the Great Plague hit and changed his plans as the housing market changed drastically. So, instead of having 3 or 4 mansions on each side, he decided to have 22 plots. With all of the issues before construction, Edward Shepherd began building St. James Square in 1726. The 3 principles of development that were previously mentioned also apply to St. James Square. These principles again being, first, the principle of an aristocratic lead, the presence of the landowner's own house in his square. Second, the principle of a complete unit of development comprising square, secondary streets, market, and perhaps church. Third, the principle of the speculative builder operating as a middleman in building the houses. Belgrave Square is best known for its architectural character. The plan was created by Thomas Cubbett, as well as Thomas Cundy. When the square was established in 1825, George Besevi was also an architect working on the square. Belgrave Square is one unit of the larger Belgravia plan. Belgrave Square is made up of 4 blocks. These blocks were created in a Greco-Roman style. In Belgrave Square, the 3 corners of the square are composed of mansions. On the south corner, the architect Henry E. Kendall created the mansion for T.R. Kemp. On the north corner, the architect Philip Hardwick created the Seaford House. Lastly, in the east corner was another house by Robert Smirke. The other side consisted of blockhouses. This block is decorated with Corinthian centers as well as porches and ornate attics. The block of houses was designed by George Besevi. Some noteworthy terms throughout our presentation are as follows. Lastly, these are our sources used for the presentation.